I am talking today about service workers, but I wanted to warn you that it's from an Angular perspective. However, as we'll talk about, service workers, really, when it comes down to it, is just a JavaScript file. So hopefully that's something we all have in common. But out of curiosity, how many front-end developers do we have here with us today? I'm one. OK. Is everyone else back-end? Is that like a, yeah? No? OK. And then out of front-end devs, how many people do Angular? OK. And then how many do React? Noise, Vue. We've got like 3 over here. And then Jen Looper in the back, she's like, yes, represent. She's carrying this half of the room for the Vue lack. Oh, I guess I should ask Ember? No, that is funny. My husband's going to really enjoy that. OK, let's do something real quick. He's an Ember dev. I'm going to take a picture of you guys raising your hand for Angular, React, and Vue. So everybody who has used Angular, React, or Vue, raise your hand. Awesome. OK, now let's all put it down for the Ember, unless somebody wants to own up to Ember for this pic. That's going to be a funny tweet. He keeps telling me, he's like, Ember's not dying. And I'm like, no, it's not dying. You're just the only one using it. So I love him to pieces, but he's sticking it out. He's a Rails guy, too, so I'm thinking that's why. So I thought this was funny and pertinent because, cows. But yes, as I mentioned, my name is Alyssa Nicoll, and I have lots of hobbies. Have a blind and deaf dog named Gummy. That's her. And I'm also a Google developer expert. What that means is they needed people to go and do talks, and I like to do talks. I'm, expert, just like fling that around loosely. But I do love the Angular community and have been in it for quite some time. So yes, service workers and cows. Put that right there. So how many of you guys have ever used a service worker before? Curiosity. Oh, wow, that's awesome. That's like 5 times the amount of people who had in the last talk. I'm hoping that's like a sign that it's becoming more popular, but maybe you guys are just a cooler crowd. So I didn't really understand the need for service workers until recently. I have lived in Orlando, Florida, for the last 8 years and freaking loved it. But for a couple of reasons, me and my husband decided it was time to move to Oklahoma. So on the new year, around January, we packed up and moved to the middle of the United States to a town called Grove. Population, God, who even knows? Like, it's so tiny. Here's how bad it is. So in December, they got the town's first ever coffee shop. Like, not even a Starbucks, just like a mom and pop coffee shop. And I was traveling about a month ago, and my mom called me, and she was like, Alyssa, it burned down. And I was like, it's been here for like 2 months. So there's a coffee arson, I think, in our town, trying to keep the city of Grove coffeeless. So anytime I'm with civilization, as I call it, I'm like, you guys have coffee, don't you? So we decided to move to Oklahoma, though, which is filled with lack of coffee, but lots of these creatures. My family actually has a ranch with cattle. And of course, these creatures, which is the primary reason. So me and my husband are both doing remote dev work. And so we were like, why not? Let's go see the family. Like, we love them, but also like, whew, it can be a lot. And this was probably the hardest thing to adjust to. I mean, coffee and lack of coffee, that's a big one. But this was the fastest, and that is not a typo, the little b. That was the fastest network speed that we were going to get. And as many of you know, that doesn't mean that's what you're actually getting. So I ran a network test, and that is a K. It was, oh my gosh. It was an awakening. Living in Orlando, and like the whole of my development career was in Orlando. And so I would travel with Google Things or other conferences and visit devs around the world. But for the most part, I was in Orlando and the network was fine. It was never something to think about. It was never something on my mind. And so when I moved to the middle of America, given it's a podunk town, but it's still in America, and this was the best that I could get as a developer, I was like terrified. So this land of mooers, as I like to call it, it really taught me how valuable service workers are. You're asking, if you have never used one, how could it help in this situation? Overscan much. I just realized, pardon the overscan. So there's an exercise that a speaking coach once told me about. And if you ever, you can, I know, maybe use this if you want to do a talk, but maybe if you're in a meeting, this is actually a really, really useful exercise to do. So you take your idea, so this is like a 40-minute talk, but I take it and I do it in 5 minutes. And then I do it again in 3 minutes, and then again in 1 minute, and then in 1 sentence, and in 1 word. And so this is a really great way of basically solidifying, like, what is the main point? And this was the sentence for this talk that I came up with when I did this exercise. So service workers are the aspirin to the headache that is painful network speeds. So basically, aspirin was my word of the day, because that is what service workers are. And painful network speeds are what we were solving. So what are you? To put it simply, as I said, it is just a JavaScript file. I really liked this definition. A service worker is a script that your browser runs in the background, separate from a web page, opening the door to features opening the door to features that don't need a web page for user interaction. So I really like the idea. Let me go ahead and bullet point this out. Service workers allow you to do cool things like push notifications and background sync. But the main thing, which I was super interested in, was intercepting and caching network responses. And the reason I was interested in this was because I could actually use, not just like look at, but like use websites that were using service workers. It was immediately apparent when I went and I moved and I was like, why isn't this loading? Why is that other page loading? And it was obviously very apparent like which companies had already started implementing them. So the reason this is such an exciting API is that it allows you to support offline experiences, giving developers complete control over the experience. So without further ado, I want to jump into my journey of adding a service worker to a website. So I work on ngdoc.io. It's a community version of Docs. It's essentially a collection of resources that me and a couple guys work on. And I was like, okay, I have access to push to this thing. Let me go ahead and try and implement it and see how it works. So as we move through, you'll see screenshots and terminal things, and it's all inside of that project. Okay, so the steps. Breaking down service workers in Angular, so hopefully, let us pray, at the end of this, it's less intimidating, and you can honestly use it in whatever project you're working in. That is the goal. And that is going to drive me nuts, that overscan. We'll get over it. We'll try not to. I'm one of those front-end people who's like, I like to say the front end of the front end, or a pixel pusher. It's really where my passion started in dev. And so whenever I see things that are like just a little bit off nowadays, it's like when you tell your friends about Comic Sans for the first time and they start seeing it everywhere. So we'll try not to, twitch. So the first step, super simple, install the service worker. The docs were like, hey, Yarn add. I still haven't gotten on the Yarn train. Is anybody using Yarn? We got a couple. Does that mean that everyone else is pretty much like, yeah, NPM? Is that what that means? Yeah, pretty much. Okay. So I was, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold, so I'm a little like snuffleupagus. So when I saw this, I was like, okay, I'm assuming for our purposes, because everything else that I've ever done, again, I had some of my friends help me with the back end of this and setting it up on the server. So I was like, in our case, I'm assuming I'm just going to go ahead and npm install it, which it did work. So yeah, there'll be a couple GIFs. This was me npm installing. Also, if you're jealous of this gorgeous color here of my terminal, I can help you out and get you that package. So yeah, I was super sad. So I npm installed and got a bunch of fun warnings, and I was like, what the dickens? So the moral of this story is, here we go. We're gonna get through this. Make sure that your code is up to date. And so I literally just had dependencies. You're saying that this is like out of date, that peer dependency is out of date. And so for some god-awful reason, I know it's a pain, but I have some really good news for you guys about update, at least if you're using the Angular CLI. I'm assuming out of you Angular people, are you all using the CLI? Are we all happy? Nobody? We got like 2 people? Okay, you guys are hurting my heart. I'm friends with these people. They're Googler people. So this guy is Stephen Fluin. He's on the Angular team. And then that guy with the arrow, that's Mike Rocky, and he's on the CLI team. And so I was actually talking to him when I was at the grocery store. It was like a couple months ago, and I was writing this talk, and I was like, so do I really have to go through my package.json file and like update each one of those numbers? Like that's how we're doing it still? Because sometimes, I know it sounds silly, but like sometimes I'll be doing something like the really slow and painful way, and somebody will lean over and be like, what are you doing? Like there's like a way faster way of doing that now. So I was like, is that really our life? And so he was like, well, it currently is, but he has something that's going to revolutionize your update life. But for now, we are stuck with updating them one by one. Essentially, it's called ng update, and I think he announced it at the last conference we were at. And you'll run it in the terminal, and it'll go through and update automatically the dependencies that are out of date. But of course, in true Angular fashion, he's adding on an amazing feature, but it's like, is it jumping the shark when you go over with a feature? I'm not sure if that counts. But essentially, it'll go through your code, find anything that's out of date, and just replace it. And so I was just like, oh my goodness, you're just like, so, and, it'll fix our update issues. 2 hours later, because apparently I can't read. I don't know, if you like type the packages wrong, it doesn't update for some reason. And I kept having this, and I finally had someone look at it, and they're like, well, you're spelling it wrong. And I'm like, of course. So yeah, it rolls eyes, good Lord. So number 2, after should have been the simplest first step, enable your service worker. ng set apps.0.service worker equals true. ng new -- service worker if you're creating an app and want to include a service worker from the get-go. So number 3, we're going to import the service worker in the root app module. So this is just my app.module.typescript file, super sexy, and add these 2 import lines. And then below, number 4, same file, we're going to register the service worker. That's an S that's cut off there. So service worker module.register. And this is going to be added into your imports. And I was like really confused because if you go into your imports, it's just a list of like one-worders, like one word, comma, like an array of these things that you're adding to your imports array. And then you have this, and I was like, what the heck? So I broke it down a little bit for anybody who's curious like I am, because I was like, I really don't understand why we're doing this whole long thing. So the first part is the module that we're importing, which is what I expected, and that's it. The second part is a .register helper for literally, as the docs say, registering purposes. It becomes a little bit more clear, though. This part is the name of the file, so like the JavaScript file that your service worker resides in. And it's the pre-built service worker script, which the CLI copies into dist to deploy along with your server. And the next and last final part, enabled when environment.production. Now, does anybody have any idea? Because I was like, but why? Does anybody have any idea why we do service workers in production mode only? Anybody ever thought about it or pondered it? Yes? To prevent caching. I asked Steven, he's an advocate for Angular, and I was like, what's up with that? It would break developer expectations, but really it comes down to, as I thought about it, like if you're deving it up and you're changing things, you don't really want to cache, or hopefully you don't want to worry about like the last thing you cached and if you're actually seeing that change. So really, you're just enabling it for production mode only. Number 5, create the config file. So the CLI has a boilerplate one, but so do the Angular docs. And I swear everybody has one that they're like, this is a sacred config file. Like everyone, anytime you like start Googling, you're like, this thing is broken with my service worker, it's always use my config file, like is the answer. So just really, at the end of the day, pick one and move on with your life. So yes, that is the shortened up version. I believe in you. I believe in you, Keynote. Okay, so yeah, as I said, lots of people have them. Just pick one and let's move on. So number 6, build the project. ng-build -- prod, which, as we talked about, production mode. Before you do this, you actually need to, well, here, let's go to the next slide. Be very, very sure. So I've heard a rumor that once you implement a service worker, it can be pretty dang difficult to unimplement it. If you guys have like done this more than I've done it, because I'm still kind of a scrubby nub on the beginning of the back end of the front end. So if you are an expert in service workers, I'd love to talk to you afterwards, because if you've ever tried to remove one, I would love also to know how that process went, because I've heard it's not so fun. So you have been warned, that is all. Oh, I love Minecraft. Okay, so as we are on to number 6, build the project. It's like super tiny. Yeah, okay, we're gonna go back and I'm gonna, okay, so yes. So sorry about this. I had no idea it would look so hideously tiny. So I built the project, it ran through, everything was green, so I was like, sweet! And so I was gonna go and do ng-serve, because that's how I've always served up the project. And then it like didn't work and all hell broke loose in my terminal, and I was like, okay, now what? So I went to the docs, and the first line I read was, because ng-serve does not work, and I was like, what the dickens? So yes. This was actually the first thing that came to my mind was the Aladdin movie when he's like, does it break? It broke. So yeah, we can't have ng-serve. We are left out. That is the cow, and it's actually a lot louder than that. This is I don't know if you've ever been mooed at by a cow. This cow was directly mooing at me because I was trying to get some video. And I was like, all right, do something lively, but like it's very loud and obnoxious. I was like, all right, like back up a step. Like, so I don't know, those cows can be kind of scary actually. Run the project in production mode, yes. So we built it, right? We built, which, how many of you actually built a project? Like, yeah? So as weird as it sounds, because I've worked for about 5 years now as a developer, before this moment, with using service workers, I never had to build a project. How did I do it, you say? Well, I ran everything in my environment, and then I would just push up to GitHub, and then the backend guys would do their thing, right? So it was always like, I would make everything look awesome and work, and I'd think through the UI and the UX, and I would do things in AngularJS or Angular, but I never actually needed to build a project before. And I actually talked to a lot of people after mentioning this, and they're like, me too, we're build virgins. I was like, yes. So not everyone's done it, guys. Let's just be nice. So cd into dist, this was a new learning experience. So I did try to run my HTTP server like at the root where you run ng-serve, and of course things weren't happening as they should. So you need to go into dist because that's what we just built, right? I guess we built this thing for distribution, I'm assuming is why it's called that. And yeah, so this is, again, super tiny, but I went into the dist folder, typed in http-server, and it said command not found for HTTP server. At this point, I was like, really? Because my friends were like, it's super easy. It's like 10 minutes. And I was like 30 minutes in. Like, so how many of you have used HTTP server? Anybody? So I've actually used the simple server, like the Python one that comes by default. Have any of you used that one before? See a couple more. So I was at this point, I was like, Okay, so it's really easy if you haven't used it. Literally just npm install. Hi, that makes sense, right? But you'll see in the upcoming screenshots of what I did, because I got frustrated and I was like, no, I'm not doing HTTP server. The simple Python simple server is on my Mac. I'm doing that. So I have an alias for it in my ZSHRC file. So essentially, though, I am running that. Lo and behold. Oh, bother. Sorry, one sec. We're going to go back and do this one. OK. So yes, lo and behold, it worked. This was really fun, because I just ran. I was like, I think I have a command for this, because my Rails buddies were like, just use your Python server. So I ran my simple server command. It went going. Is that even how? And then I typed in localhost 8000, and I got this. So I was really excited at this point, because I had just used a default, like grabbed off of the Angular CLI whatever the crap they had in their config file and threw that in mine. I didn't tell it, like, here's this asset, Sally, please cache it. So I was really, really excited by essentially what I'd gotten. So I'd also never ran in production mode before. So I was like, is this actually going to work? The loading, obviously, we're not getting everything. And then, of course, my test was really funny. I was like, oh, wait, we should probably put this in offline mode, like, to see if it's working. So I put it in offline mode, and it looked exactly the same. Bum, 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 bum. Yes, so as you can see, there's a little offline check in the inspector. So, OK, cool, but is this actually doing anything? Because as I'd said, I'd never built a project before. I'd never needed to, and I'd never ran like a simple server on an Angular project. I was like, this feels really jank. I don't even really know what we're doing. So in order to kind of prove to myself that the service worker was doing something, I stashed everything, and I checked out, what did I do? Oh, develop. And develop it has nothing that I've been doing on it, right? It's a clean branch. And so I checked out develop, and I think before I recorded this, I also did the build. And then I ran the simple server in dist. And I was pleased, so super pleased at what I saw. I went into incognito too, because I was like, I'm going to really prove this to myself that it's not doing anything. And I got the dinosaur. And so this was a really cool light bulb moment, because just by following like the first 5 steps and using a know-nothing config file, it actually was doing something. This was my proof on my non-service worker branch. So how do we update my code? My very next, I'm very like this with my coding. It's quite fun. I always like finish a task, but I might be like doing 2 or 3 things at once, and so it's kind of this cyclical. So my very next thought in the process was, well, like, how do I actually like update things? If I'm going to make a change, what am I going to find out? What am I going to see? Because I assumed that Command-Shift-R in production mode wasn't actually going to do it. So I went through, and we had decided, we were actually talking with the Angular team to get our site linked on like the bottom of the docs. And there was a couple of things with like parameters that I needed to, like query params that I needed to change. And we were also talking with them about essentially something that probably a lot of you think through as developers is how do we basically associate ourselves with Google but not look like Google Docs? And so we ended up changing all of our colors. And the last thing that I needed to change was the logo itself. And so, ooh, did I already do that? I think so, yes. Yes, so I went through and I changed the logo. And now the important step to remember to rebuild for production again. So when I rebuilt, I had the new logo in. Now that is unfortunate. You can't actually see it. That's funny. Oh, one moment, people. I got this. I'm going to do this, and we're going to press play again. Nope, did it the wrong way. I don't know what is wrong with me directionally. That should have been pretty obvious which side of the page the logo's on. OK, so we're going to do that so we can all see. So I went back after rebuilding, and everything is green, but I still have my red logo, and I was pretty frustrated. I didn't really, I had no idea. It's okay, we can breathe and not panic. It's actually the service worker doing its job. So it's looking at the cache filed first and pulling up that before it's downloading the new stuff. And you can actually change that in the config file, as I've learned. So what I did was I actually just restarted again, and oh, I'm gonna go ahead and skip that. That's a long video. This one. Oh, sorry. I don't know where the video went. I think it's actually at the end of this one. So what we're gonna do is, well, I can just tell you about it, and we can let this roll, and if it gets to it, it gets to it. This was actually a really funny, so at this point, I have probably ran the HTTP server or the Python server, like, you can't even see the logo, it's over there. It's a wash. So at this point, I probably ran the HTTP server like 5 or 6 times. I don't know if any of you have ever built a project and then like actually watched it build, but it was like pretty painful. There's I tweeted about it actually because there's this one point where it's like 92% chunk asset optimization, and if any of you've ever been there, you totally get it. But it like hangs at that asset optimization for like 5 minutes, and you're like, and that's when my husband walks by and goes, "You're not actually supposed to watch projects build. Like, go to Twitter or something." So essentially what happened though, because the video was cut off, was after refreshing and giving it a second, the new logo did show up. Something, I guess, as we talked about earlier, because at this point I was like, oh, and I need to tweak this button, and we have this one feature for flags, so I should probably start adding that. I started working on it, and then with the build process again, I was like, oh, this is why people don't like develop like this. And so I totally understand now why you're not supposed to have service workers in anything other than production mode. So yes, I'm gonna jump to the next one. So if you hadn't noticed, I don't know if any of the screenshots before had shown, there was a ton of errors. And obviously, my next thought was like, we still have this loader. I'm not getting any of the actual content. So I've actually been running 2 things, and like sometimes I expect things to work magically. So I was like, just in case like the service worker like wants to, or the simple server, I guess, wants to like magically connect with my backend, I'm gonna go ahead and have that running. So the whole time that I've been testing this, in another terminal tab, I had my my backend running, and it was serving at like localhost 8801/API/tags or /API, whatever. And so that's what all of these are yelling about, because they're like it's not really there. And so this was something really freaking cool that I learned about, and I figured out how to do it with HTTP server, did not figure out how to do it with the Python one. But yeah, this is actually on the GitHub README for HTTP server. It talks about -- proxy. So has anybody here used a proxy before? Yeah, thanks. I remember them back in like high school days, like we used proxies to like get around the things that were blocking us from playing games online. But as far as in this sense, I'd never used one before. And so it was literally as simple as saying HTTP server -- proxy, and I pointed it at 8801. And it's really cool because if you'll go back and read this one line, it says, proxies all requests which can't be resolved locally to this whatever given URL that you pass it. Apparently, I was talking to some of my friends at Google, that's not like, they're like, back in my day, that's not how proxies worked. And I was like, I'm sorry, like I had no idea what to say to that. But I think it's really cool because essentially, if it doesn't have it yet, like these assets, it's not going to look at the proxy URL for them. It has them. But if it doesn't get it and it gets an error, it's gonna go ahead and look for it there. And so all of my little errors were clean, and I was actually getting everything and was loading in the first, like these are a list of resources. And so, I mean, they're my test list, so forgive, but was super excited. And of course, the offline test. For some reason, I kept forgetting to actually click offline. So yeah, the offline test failed miserably, because as you can see, we still have our spinner. And this is my dog Barnaby. And that's him giving up on life. At least when I look over on the couch, I'm like developing, I'm like, yeah, that's about right. Like for moments, anytime I need to look up, like that's encouraging because it's just like, give up, Alyssa. So it's okay though. There was actually only one final step that I needed to do. And it makes sense because we'd never actually told the service worker about, I call them custom buds. We never told the service worker about custom things that it would have no idea about. How would it know where my tags were? So inside of ngdoc, my project, inside of source, inside of this JSON file, I was reading about it and it was like, create a data group. And I was like, okay, let's create a data group. And then it said, after that, go ahead and populate your data group. So the first thing is the name, which I don't know why it's not showing up. Slow as the dickens. I called it API-performance. This is literally up to you what to call it. And then the URLs. So this was super difficult. What I did was I went back and I looked at like, you know, those errors we were getting, like it's not finding these things. And anything that it wasn't finding, I just like slapped in there. I said, here, these things, go ahead and cache those things for me. It's, I know, super, super complicated. Cache config, strategy performance. Now this is performance versus freshness. One is going to go ahead and say, look at the cached things first. And then if they're not there, go ahead and like load other things. Whereas the other way around, freshness, as per the name, get the freshest stuff first and then fall back if you're not getting anything because you're on Oklahoma Wi-Fi to the cached business. So I just did performance, and then you give it a max size, a max age. So yeah, I needed to add these routes to be cached. Oh, and now you can see the offline glory. This moment for me was beautiful. So we actually had my logo showing up, which was the new one, not the red one, and then all of the default ones, and then the new things that I just legitimately guessed. I was like, I think I should add these URLs to this data group. Oh, awesome, it works. It's always fun whenever things actually work the way you expect. So yeah, I really enjoy being close to family. It's been a change. And also hanging out with the amazing cow critters. But the crippling network speeds are just ridiculous. And honestly, without service workers, it's amazing the difference it makes for me. And I'm in the middle of America, right? So I think if you can keep in mind that not everyone, hopefully you have awesome network at home, so not everyone has incredible network at home or even network in general. And these can, like, just by including a JavaScript file, you can really, really help people out. Some would even say that if not for cows, service workers would never have been invented. I don't know who, but some people I'm sure say that. So when you're pondering to yourself, should I service worker? Just remember that it is for the cow puppies. So this was the first baby cow born on the ranch. And I went to pet it, and it's like legitimately as soft as a puppy, which is kind of weird because it's a cow, but it was super soft, like velvet. So that is all. That is all I have for you guys. Thank you so, so much. Yeah, thank you.